And we are live, Feeding the Dragon Show, Feeding the Dragon podcast on March 30th, 2021. Ryan Ray alongside the one and only Chris Fenton. Mr. Fenton, how are you doing today, sir?
I am very good. I am saying game on Periscope, like our last run on this, I guess, old tech before Twitter tells us what we're supposed to do next.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. So we will be live streaming somewhere. Hopefully Twitter will give us a patch so we can come just back to Twitter. If not, we will tweet out a link to where we'll be. And always, you can download the podcast, Feeding the Dragon, in your preferred podcast platform. And while you're there, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review. And so iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast at, we will be there for sure. So if you miss this show or any future shows or past shows, you can find us there.
By the way, I feel like you got a different wardrobe on. There's no camo. You got there's some colors there. I'm liking that.
Well, it's just fishing. See, this is all. I just wear fishing gear because I love to fish. So this is just a fishing shirt. It's just a different brand. It's just a different style, but it is a fishing shirt. But yes, no camo today. Let's start with the American Thinker. I don't think we've had a story from here before, but we do because the one and only Mr. Fenton has an op-ed in that publication that came out on yesterday, I believe.
Yeah, no, American Thinker. I hadn't read it a lot, but my publisher was dying to get me a piece on there at some point. So I had worked with, I lecture at the National War College for Captain Corey Ray's soft power influence class. And he and I have debated this idea of the Beijing Olympics and whether to boycott or not. And he has one perspective that's based on historical sort of case studies. And then I have another perspective that's based on what I think is more of a leverage standpoint with this upcoming sort of dinner party that Beijing wants to throw in a flawless kind of way with perfect attendance. So I decided to write an op-ed about recognizing America's leverage over the next 300 days. And, essentially came up with the idea that, look, just deciding whether to boycott or not shouldn't be the question we're asking. It should be, hey, we know the Chinese Communist Party wants this to be flawless. They want it to be, instead of that massive sort of coming out debutante party that the Beijing 2008 Olympics was, this is their fancy dinner party. They want it to go perfectly. They want perfect attendance. So in order to have that perfect attendance, why don't we mandate certain requirements that need to be done in order to guarantee our participation in those games and try to rally our Western alliance into it too. And Captain Corey Ray added to that he thinks like the idea of not boycotting is a good thing, but pressuring them where there is true pressure points is a smart way to go. And then he also walks through some of the historicals of actually how constructive boycotting games are. But in it, and I just did an interview after that published yesterday with NPR, and then also did one with the Federalist this morning. We walked through the 8 things that I suggested, which were definitely just take with a grain of salt. The idea was 8 ideas that I thought were relatively realistic, good check the box type of accomplishments that we could gain in the next 300 days and lay the groundwork for longer term objectives. And then the idea is like some of them might be harder than others, but like let's at least get that dialogue flowing.
Yeah, we've talked about the Olympics quite often, and this will tie into some of the stuff that's gone on with Nike here recently. And Bill Bishop pointed this out as well, is that it's a weird time for China to attack Nike and Adidas because they will be plastered all over the Olympic Games in 2022. And so I don't think the boycott is necessary. I just think continuing to talk about it, continuing to press the issue, continuing to be able to say the things that you want to say when you want to say them, that seems to put so much more, like we've devalued that amount of pressure in the U.S. And it's so weird. Like if you say the wrong thing and you're a big corporation, they get mad. Okay, well, the more we say the things, the more pressure we put on them to have to respond, to have to figure out how they're going to handle these things. And so to me, it's very quite simple. Let's just keep doing those things. And I think those will have a lot larger impact in the U.S. It's, I guess, maybe from our perspective, Chris, we turn on Tucker, we turn on Maddow, and they're going back and forth, and we're like, oh, that's just a bunch of noise. That's just not the way it is when you cross the Pacific. And so they're trying to keep that noise out. And so if you make a little noise here, the Daryl Morey tweet, as we talked about 100 times on the show, it went crazy for no reason. And so, and then the other thing is though, and it's hard to ever measure what the official message is versus what the people inside of China think. And what we've seen with the Nike and Adidas stuff is, despite the fact that they were blocking their access to their apps, that there's no national pressure, but Huawei was censoring, the sales inside of China seem to be pretty good. So you makes you wonder if they push this sports narrative too far. They push away from Nike and Adidas. Oh, by the way, that's tied to the NBA and all these other sports athletes. Maybe there's not as much political capital there for the CCP, and they might find themselves in a precarious spot. So I think it's good to keep doing what we're doing.
Well, I mean, that's always been my point, is that there's strength in numbers. I mean, it's probably one thing to try to cancel out Nike or cancel out H&M or cancel out Hugo Boss or cancel out Adidas when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party and their consumers having access to those goods and services. But when you essentially cancel out all four, it becomes a little bit harder of an issue for them to navigate. And we're seeing articles actually from the South China Morning Post, which you could argue is under the control of Beijing now, talking about how, yes, the netizens were in an uproar over Nike and Adidas and H&M and Hugo Boss, but there's actually signs of real life in regards to consumers wanting to engage with those products and services and actually consume them. So once again, it becomes a strength in numbers play. And I think Chinese Communist Party is starting to realize that they got to be careful with some of these shots across the bow. I mean, let's face it. A week ago, people were going, oh my gosh, this is crazy. They're going to start doing this on a regular basis with all kinds of American companies and global companies to try to showcase the amount of leverage and power and strength and influence they have over all of us to dictate what we're allowed to talk about and dictate what we're not allowed to talk about. But some of that's starting to backfire. And to do that, wow, we're a little bit on pins and needles about whether to attend this Beijing Olympics coming up. By the way, there is that Japanese Olympics coming up too, where a lot of the Chinese teams have uniforms and various other equipment that's made by some of these very companies that apparently they want to kick out of China. It's a really, really delicate thread to needle for them, just as much as it's a very delicate needle to thread for these American and global companies to thread also. I mean, how to play it, whether they're being truthful to their own nations where they're headquartered, or doing exactly what Beijing's telling them to do. So there's all kinds of frying pan and fire situations going on all sides. And it's a really interesting moment, I think, in the global relationship with China going into both of these Olympic Games. And there are pressure points. There are ways to get leverage on China in this case. And by the way, some of these, like, for instance, having unrestricted and unscheduled opportunities to visit the Xinjiang province to actually see what's going on there, I think could be something that we demand in order for showing up. We don't have to accuse them of genocide. We don't have to accuse them of doing something wrong. We can simply say, hey, there's circumstantial evidence that you are. We'd like to see for ourselves. And we're not going to back you in a corner and say you're guilty until proven innocent. Let us go see it and tell you, hey, the coast is clear. We're okay there. Then on top of it with Taiwan, I mean, a lot of these threatening moves and military practices and exercises that are going on that are threatening the sovereignty of Taiwan and the Taiwanese people, I think those should definitely stop between now and the Olympic Games if they expect us to show up. There's various little baby steps, and I put 8 of them in that op-ed, and it's up on my Twitter, and I'll resend it out with the podcast. But anyway, it was a cool, it's, I think, a nice op-ed piece to have out there that's creating a lot of interesting conversation and a lot of interesting media hits for me.
Yeah, the only thing I'd push back on there is I don't think we should have the right to show up to China anytime we want and inspect. I don't agree with that. Just like they shouldn't have the right to inspect us anytime they want. Like those are things that we would, if the Chinese tomorrow said, hey, we want to come see what's going on downtown Chicago with all these shootings, we'd be like, you done lost your mind. Like, you done lost your mind. And we can't demand that right of them either, I don't think. However, they did offer us the chance to go, and we haven't gone. And so that would be my point, is like, when they offer you a chance to go, just go. Instead of, and this is where diplomacy and all this stuff to me is so frustrating, because there's talks of, we care about human rights. Well, just go. Just go. Send Chris and I. We'll go. No anal swaps, but we'll go. And so we'll fly in. I'll put a mask on and we'll go. We'll take a video. We'll get it done. It's really simple. And so I think that's where you see the frustration comes into it. But one final thing, Chris, I'll say is that, there's it, and I'm going to write a review on Pillsbury book, The 100-Year Marathon. He talks about how we all believe that China was opening up, and then it didn't. And I still go back to, if you believe that principle, you shouldn't abandon it, because I think that's right. And he and many other commentators point to Xi Jinping's ascension as the change of that. So prior to Xi Jinping, they felt like it was happening. It was going that way. But when you look at the Nike story as a microcosm, you see, okay, there's pressure top down to kind of put on Nike and those other groups, yet the consumers are still willing to buy. That's what you hoped would happen, right? That's what you'd hope would happen, is this bottom-up groundswell of support. It's hard for us to measure because we can't get polling data, we can't get free speech, but here is a small sample that maybe, just maybe, they're not wanting to be libertarian like old Ryan, but maybe there's more of a little bit more liberalization inside of China than we realize. And so I think we have to keep pushing these things, sending our athletes to places, encourage them to speak freely, as you said, speak in not in unison, but collectively or with a voice. And so I just think that we can get so into the nitty gritty of diplomacy that we kind of forget that, hey, this is a good moment. And we talk about the bad moments. This is a good moment. I think that if Nike consumers are willing to buy Nike stuff, it doesn't mean that they would buy it regardless of what Nike said. But for this, they're willing to do it. We should celebrate that there's at least some support inside of the rank and file members of just average Chinese, like we're average Americans.
Yeah, well, I think some of it comes into play where it's the discovery process of both the Chinese government and the Chinese people, where they realize how exactly intertwined and coupled and entangled together they are with the United States of America, the same way that we've constantly are being reminded of how intertwined we are with China. I mean, this decoupling idea just simply doesn't make any sort of logic or practical sense, because we are fully like interwoven with each other. So what we need to do is figure out how we can partially decouple and also create a much better relationship that's much more fair and reset moving forward, and also defend some of the values and principles that we hold dearly, that we hold consistently around the world. That's going to be where the disruption comes in, and that is where we can make progress, because China has seen it, right? With the NBA, the NBA was essentially sidelined for 17 months. Some of the teams and some of the players and professionals involved with the league still are. And the Chinese people moved on to the CBA. And in fact, I just saw President Xi is talking a very big game about making soccer something as akin to a national pastime, and making that big play for the World Cup in, I guess it's 2030. That's an interesting way to sort of wean the populace off of this consumption of basketball and into another sport in a big way. And we know for a fact that the consumer excitement towards the NBA isn't what it used to be. I mean, the damage had been done. We're going to see the same thing if they take stands on various individual businesses or industries. But once again, if they try to make a broad swath, it's going to be very hard for them to control netizens that both are anti that consumer product or service, and then the others that are feeling like, wait, too many are being taken away from my choice. I need some of them back.
Okay, this comment will take us to where we're going next, which is Iran. Yesterday on the Texas One Guest podcast, the great Anas Al-Haji and myself talked about the petrodollar, the role of the dollar, and the digital yuan. Anas is a far greater expert than I am, as for starters, but also far more confident about the dollar's ability in the long term. We saw that over the weekend, I guess it was, Iran and China struck a 25-year deal. It makes sense. And I know you were talking offline about Huawei will be taking over or rolling out 5G infrastructure in Iran. The digital yuan, I think, is in the Middle East will be something to follow, because the dollar and the petrodollar has been tied up there so long, but China will want to siphon it off. Now, it's not easy to do, and I'm not calling for the fall of the dollar, but they're making deals in the Middle East, and how's it go? Winning friends and influencing people. Like that's what their goal is in the Middle East, and they're doing a good job at it.
Yeah, I was talking to NPR about an article that comes out later this week about the Middle East. And obviously the Middle East is a very complicated place where you want true experts in that space. I had flirted a little bit with working with Saudi Arabia over the years. I've been to the UAE and Dubai and Abu Dhabi. That's the extent of sort of my expertise there. But I do find it interesting that China's making a big play there to sort of meet with everyone, which is sort of interesting because I don't know if everyone there wants them meeting with everyone. They want to, sort of bifurcate who's Sunni, who's Shiite, who's warring with who, and China, you be our friend, but not any of the ones that we don't like. So it's interesting to see them try to spread the love in an area where we know spreading the love doesn't work all that well. And then on top of it, seeing them talk to Iran, I find really fascinating because if you look at the sanctions that are going on there, we know for a fact that 5G, that technology is extremely important on a national security level and on a consumer level, but a national security level in regards to who's controlling it. We know Huawei, China controls 48% of the patents. Huawei owns about 27 or 28% of the patents. And then Ericsson out of Sweden was supposed to be setting up the 5G network in Iran, but now because of sanctions, they can't. So that means Huawei is going to be in there, which is really interesting because right now, the enemy of the enemy is the friend of China, and that's Iran. Having 5G in there, having a Belt and Road Initiative that's very heavily influenced in Iran, having a long 25-year, I think it's $400 billion pact for oil, which is the energy source that China needs in the way that those two countries are going to stay bonded through that commodity, is a really sort of precarious position for the Western alliance to have. I mean, having a China-Iran very tied at the hip type of relationship, I don't think is something that any of us really want when we think about national security level issues.
It doesn't bother me one bit. Why does it bother you?
Why does it bother me? Well, because Iran has got a nuclear program that they're trying to push forward in a certain way, and China already has one. And we know China doesn't have a problem selling intercontinental ballistic missiles to anyone. They've done it with Saudi Arabia dating back to the 80s. So, and then on top of it, Iran, is Shiite? Uyghurs are Sunnis. So there's no love lost there between those two Muslim sort of sides. So I don't know. I just think it's an issue.
I mean, from the national security perspective, I'm not saying that you espouse this. My question would be is, do you believe that the Iranian government wants to die in office, by a bomb? Because when people talk about the nuclear proliferation and we're afraid of all this stuff, if they push the button, then they die. Like there's no ifs, no ands, no buts about it. Like they're gone, they're obliterated. And so there's not that many people who are suicidal, and there's not that many people in power who are suicidal. And so I don't really see much concern about the Iranians. And I think when I was born in '85, so when I was growing up in the '90s, we were warned about all these suitcase dirty bombs that were out there and how they were going to be snuck into our cities and blown up. It could still happen, but it hasn't. So I think that this whole, like I pointed out the Suez Canal last week, there's a lot of talk about terrorism and the threat of terrorism and this stuff. But listen, Kim Jong-un, you know what he does? He wakes up on Tuesday and he fires a rocket into the ocean so he can get a few press headlines. He knows if he ever goes to war, he will die. Either we will kill him or his own people will take him and cut his head off in the streets. It will end badly. These people want power. They want to stay in power. And the last thing you do if you want that is to bomb someone. So I don't think there's this threat. And I think Americans have really bought into this idea that all these threats are out there, and they're just not. They're just not there from my perspective. I'm not saying I'm right on this, but I don't see any evidence other than what we're told by our own CIA that these threats are everywhere, because there's no nuclear bombs going off. There's no dirty bombs going off. And so why do I care if Iran and China want to do a deal together? I don't see it as a threat to us.
Look, I mean, we can go into an isolation mode, which I mean, look, being the world's policeman or police person is not something that I particularly think is all that great for the long term health of America because we have our own problems at home. But I just think China creating new alliances with entities that haven't been that friendly to the United States is probably just not a great situation, particularly if it moves into some sort of a currency war with the U.S. dollar, which we've talked about before. You also have tech, which, by the way, 5G is not just a national security issue for the infrastructure and the way it works. It's also an espionage tool. It's a big data tool. Look, I'm not a crazy hawk, and I'm not going to say that people want to launch nukes on each other, but I do know that if there's enough of a threat, a Thucydides trap can occur just simply by a bunch of hawks getting together and talking about it.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we want Iran to be our friends, then we should trade with them. We're not gonna persuade them to be our friends by starving their people to death through our sanctions. It's not like the Iranian people are sitting there like, oh God, we love America. They're like, we're starving to death, and their government's telling them that the Americans are doing it. And well, by the way, they're right, whether you agree that that's the right policy or not. So I think that the American force policy is so bizarre because China's like, yeah, what do we do with you guys? Yeah, we're gonna spawn your people, and all this other stuff that I agree with is bad. And we're like, well, if you don't come to the table and work with us, then we're gonna punish you. And they're like, screw it, we'll go to China. Well, we didn't win anything there, so it's not isolationist mode. It's just a practical reality.
Look, I think you're right, but look at the hawks and the doves on the Iran front, and look at Israel in the middle of it. It's for some reason it's an overly complicated issue, and it's so out of my lane. I don't really know, but we have created a vacuum there that China's moving into, and I don't think that really helps us, right?
So I agree. We've created a vacuum. we agree on that. I think it's our policy that's pushed them to the Chinese would be the point that I'm getting at. But anyways, okay, let's move on. Hong Kong. I have Hong Kong written down, but I don't. Election law.
By the way, I feel bad when we move off of a topic without solving the issue. We're usually pretty good at that.
Well, I mean,
I gotta say, I don't know.
We talked about the non-aggression principle. I believe the non-aggression principle in Iran, in China, in the U.S., in Antarctica, on the moon, in Saturn. That's what I believe. And so the U.S. aggressing in the Middle East is not our place. And so
it hasn't helped us at all. I mean, if anything, you could look at it going, hey, you know what, China, move in there, take advantage of the vacuum and go realize like what fucked up Russia and us all these years, right?
Right. So, I mean, that's just generally my stance. I know it's not a popular American stance. It's not anti-Americanism. It's just simply just like I said earlier, I wouldn't want China to call us up and say, hey, we want to see about all these murders in Chicago. We're coming to look. We'd say, no, screw you guys. You're not coming here. We can't have the right to call them up and say, we're coming to look. But when they open the door, we come. So, I mean,
I also think it's a little weird too that China, I don't know how it's going to work with China. I mean, China made some major deal with Saudi Arabia, who's over there visiting is visiting with Iran's enemies, as well as those enemies know he's meeting with Iran. I don't know how they're going to balance that all. It just seems like everybody's going to get upset about it, and it might backfire on China and actually might mire them into a mess that, quite frankly, we've been mired in, and maybe it allows us to gain an edge on. I don't know.
Only if China starts taking sides, because Iran and Saudi Arabia are both OPEC members. So this, again, I think there's a bunch of a lot more propaganda there than there is reality. So they're both OPEC members. So if they could both be OPEC members, then they can both do a deal with China. So listen, it's a complicated world out there. I'll say that. So
by the way, I thought it was interesting. So to move off of that, I mean, we talked about Uyghur, Sunni, Shiite, Iran. I thought it was interesting. God, who sent it out? Oh, I think it was Elizabeth Economy at Council on Foreign Relations tweeted out how do you pronounce her name? Anapur, the person on CNN.
I don't know.
The interviewer. She had Ambassador Cui on there the other day, and she actually has some pretty tough questions and showed footage of kids and orphanages and various other things. And I thought it was really interesting to hear Ambassador Cui say that this was manipulated journalism, it's fraudulent, it shouldn't be, it was quite startling. And she said, no, these are investigative journalists that went there. This is what they saw. Like, you're being ridiculous. Like, I don't understand where. And it was an interesting exchange. And once again, I mean, God, Ambassador Cui's got a really difficult job trying to toe the party line and sound like he really means it. But it's amazing also watching him do it, because you just know he's being forced to, and who knows, he might actually believe it all too. But it's an interesting exchange that I tweeted out, and I recommend people checking it out.
I wonder, I've thought about this before, how would Americans feel if they heard, let's just say, over the course of 2 weeks, we had on 30 different Chinese ambassadors, representatives from the world, and they asked them generally the same questions. Would Americans realize how quick the narrative is basically the same script? Like, it is almost verbatim the same script. If you ask them about the Uyghurs, whether it's the ambassador to South Africa, to Iran, to the U.S., they have the same script. It is impressive. If you follow on Twitter, you can see this. Do you think Americans would catch on to the fact that they're all reading from a script?
I mean, if you could keep America's attention on all those interviews, yeah, I think they would pick it up. I mean, it's like Bill Bishop said, there's no career upside to dissenting at all on anything that Xi Jinping believes in or says. So that's a real issue for anybody underneath them. So I just think whether they're told to say this stuff or whether they just know it's in their best interest to know exactly what the party line is and memorize it and essentially run it word for word via any question you're asked and just deflect off of questions that maybe you don't have answers for. I think that's just the way they're programmed.
I think I don't know if it's emailed, Slacked, WhatsApp, WeChatted. I swear to you, I think it's told to them, because we were in a meeting one time, and it was a meeting with a handful of journalists and myself and a couple of Chinese representatives. And if you ask them a certain question, boom, here comes the answer. Boom, here it comes. And you just knew if you asked them that question. And so you try to trick them and try to work around it. No, they had so. And if you turn on the TV, you would have seen them give the same answers there. So it's almost like there's a Slack channel in the morning. Like,
right. And every once in a while they go off script, and next thing you know, they're getting, chastised for it, or they disappear or whatever.
Yeah.
And
I would be on. Yeah, I'm not blaming them. I'd be on script too. I'm just saying. Yeah. I just wonder if Americans really realize that when they're hearing from the Chinese ambassador, it's propaganda, but at a level that we're not even accustomed to. Because in the U.S. you had to have like McConnell criticizing Biden or Pelosi on Trump. You don't have that at all from whoever's talking in China, and it's very much scripted. So.
Well, by the way, speaking of on script, I mean, what about this WHO investigation that came out with essentially a goose egg of anything that was substantive, and now everybody's going, well, wait a minute, we need a real investigation, and what a crazy scenario. And I think at this point now, I almost feel like it's futile to even keep pushing the issue. We pretty much know what happened there. I mean, what's your feeling on all of this?
I wrote about this last year in the War Room and said that, if I don't believe in the lab theory personally, but if it was the case, China would have enough time to burn the evidence, hide the people, whatever they have to do to put them away. I don't know how you even tell this stuff. It's so far outside my wheelhouse to understand, like, why do you need to go to the lab? Like, you can't just look at the DNA code. So I don't even know how it works. I'm just saying, they're saying they have to go there. So I'm assuming something's there that they think. Therefore, whatever is there in the lab, they just burn the building down. Like, so to me, I never thought anything was going to happen. But I always did believe the bat narrative, or whatever, the wet markets. I don't have a dog in the hunt. I really have a dog in the hunt. And so that was kind of my case. And I'm not surprised with this. I think the frustration comes from, we waited so long, not me, because this is what I expected, but we waited so long, and it feels like, is China being honest? Are they lying, going back and forth and all that? And then you come to this point and people are like, we're still getting masks, we still can't travel, we've got vaccines. Well, crap, China, you screwed us. And so I think that we kind of set ourselves up for this kind of predictable outcome where people are mad and we don't have answers.
Yeah, I mean, well, and then on top of it, it just exposes sort of the conflict that's going on with the WHO and how it's funded and On top of it too, it shows that the rancor between the two countries and the Western world with China is going to make it really difficult the next time a new pandemic shows up to trust what information's coming and to trust the fact that we're all going to work together in order to cure the world of this issue. It would be nice if we can figure out, okay, what's done is done. We can't go back in time, but there's a lot of mistakes that were made via all countries. Let's figure out a game plan moving forward for when the next pandemic hits, because we know it's just a question of when, not if. So it'd be nice to actually have some sort of learning curve from this thing and apply it to trying to cure what happened over the last year in a much quicker and more efficient kind of way.
Are you talking about the COVID vaccine passports?
I didn't bring up that, but if you want to bring it up, go for it.
Well, I thought that's what you're talking about preparing for it next time, is these COVID vaccine passports. I don't know. It's like, I think that's also tied into this, which is, obviously you can guess my stance on a COVID vaccine passport. But when you look at the failure of communication, of leadership, of government, and one of the things that I haven't heard anyone else really point out that I pointed out a while back, and it's been frustrating, is where are the intelligence reports from China back in November of last year, back in December of last year, back in early January? We have spies in China, not just us, all the major world. Where are the intelligence reports saying what they thought was going on? I'm not saying they're right. I'm just curious what was being said to our government officials. I've never heard that actually come out. We surely can declassify that by now. Like, unless we think that they had it in the lab and they're hiding it, why were we not releasing that? Because when you look at the response globally, whatever you think of that, part of it is based upon, because if you remember, they'd be like, well, what we're hearing from China is this, what we're hearing from China is that. It's like, well, don't we have spies in China? Aren't we listening to what they're saying? Like, what are we hearing? And I felt like the lack of transparency early on really set us up for this frustration. Because if Trump or Boris or whoever came out and said, listen, we have pages of spies saying that this is nothing here, there's no big deal, at least you have that to go off of. So I think we've just handled this terribly. And then when you talk about the passport, the vaccine passport, I mean, that's, how can you argue on one hand that we're trying to increase immigration or maybe open borders, and on the other hand, you're saying we need a passport to move around? None of these things really make sense to most folks. And so I think you're going to get a lot of pushback there. So I don't think you're going to find a lot of common ground on how to move forward on these issues, because we don't really have policies on immigration or on travel or passports or anything like that. So I'll quit rambling now.
Well, I guess the question too is going to be, what's the rest of the world going to do? I mean, I'm assuming China's going to have some really strict draconian measures for years to come. I would imagine a lot of the European nations are going to. So are we just going to, I mean, one thing we could do is just sort of hide behind the fact that everybody else is doing it, right? Or are we going to stand out and do something that others aren't? Look, I don't know if you want people that haven't been vaccinated, I guess you want them tested, right? But at some point we're going to stop testing for COVID because it shouldn't be an issue, right? But I don't know. I guess we don't check for measles or, chicken pox or whatever either. So,
it's interesting because when you go to like Africa, and I think in China as well, they have those monitors that you walk by, like the heat screens.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever seeing those when I've come back into the U.S. Is that because I'm an American citizen, or we just don't have them here? Or do you know?
Well, I don't know in this COVID post-COVID.
No, pre-COVID. If you went to Africa,
I've never seen it. I feel like I've seen them in maybe in the UAE, but yeah, China is the only one that really stands out that they're definitely there in a big way. I don't even know if they're on all the time either. It seems like you walk under them, but it doesn't look like it's measuring anything. So I don't know.
Yeah, they have been in Africa, whichever country I've been to, and you just kind of walk in front of it and someone's kind of looking, and I don't know what they're doing. I guess if you're hot or whatever, you turn a different color on the screen. But like that would be the preventive measure that you could put in place. We haven't had that in the U.S. before, and so I've often wondered how effective things like that are. As I've said, I'm fine. Like when I went to Zambia, I had to get, I think, typhoid and something else to go in, or maybe to come back to the U.S. That makes sense, And so if we're talking about a vaccine passport to enter a country, then I'm fine with those rules. The intrastate travel in the U.S. with the vaccine passport, I think is going to be very problematic, at least for some. But we'll see.
Well, to finish up, I mean, and speaking of traveling, to finish up a little bit at the end here, there's obviously been a lot of interesting military exercises and sort of symbolic confrontations around Philippines and some of the disputed territories in the waters of the South China Sea. And then on top of it, Taiwan continues to have more of this harassment from military exercises from China. But even more so, it's interesting that the U.S. ambassador to, how do you say it, Palau? Palau, a guy named John Hennessy Niland, is making a visit or has made the visit already to Taiwan. And that's really rough the feathers of Beijing right now, because that's the first ambassador, U.S. ambassador to step foot on Taiwan, essentially recognizing it in a symbolic way as a separate sovereign country.
Yeah, Where do you think the Biden administration is trying to go with Taiwan? I can't get a read on that.
Well, I think they'd like to just keep the ambiguity sort of stance alive in the one country, two systems without really televising or making it too public that that's sort of the way we want to do it, and sell arms on the side, but not really officially make official visits or whatever it is. I don't know if they're actually going more aggressive than what has been done in the past, but it does seem like there's a lot of chatter about the possibility of Beijing and the CCP getting a lot more aggressive. So that might create a Thucydides trap once again, but a way to counter it on the U.S. side in some sort of more aggressive stance than we've had in the past.
We'll leave with this. What percentage chance do you think that Beijing or that China launches any kind of attack? So that's a missile, drops troops on the island of Taiwan between now and the Beijing the Olympics next year. What percentage chance would you put it at? I'd put it at 0 or 1%. I think it's really low.
Yeah, it would be surprising, right? That's always a good move. I don't know. I would say if you're on an endless timeline, it's 100%. If it's a shorter timeline, like pre-Olympics, I'd give it 20%. And I don't think it's going to be a hot war sort of invasion either. I think what experts are saying, it would be some sort of cyber attack and some sort of information warfare, and then some sort of more subtle move, I guess, if there is such a thing.
Well, and the reason I'm asking that is because if you think that there's a low chance, so 20% is fine, 20% between now and next year, now is the chance for the U.S. really to press the Taiwan initiative, because Beijing is going to have such a hard time doing, like I said before, like they're limited on how much more they can expand.
That's what I put in the op-ed. I feel like that's an easy one, right? Like we're not showing up if you continue this stuff. In fact, stop the exercises for the next 300 days or we're just not coming. And then the question, what happens after the Olympics? I don't know, but at least you're buying some time.
Exactly. Okay. At the Dragon Feeder on Twitter, at Ryan Ray Senior, Ryan Ray SR is our handles. Download the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find good podcasts at. And I'm sure we'll be back this week. We'll be tweeting out if it's back on Twitter, hopefully, because Periscope is dying. RIP Periscope tomorrow. And we'll figure all that out and we'll let you know. And we'll talk to you then.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining.